The teenagers laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at that piece of junk," one of them called out, pointing at the faded blue pickup truck. "Bet it doesn't even run half the time." The elderly man loading groceries into the truck bed didn't respond, just continued his careful movements with the patience of someone who'd heard it all before. But across the parking lot, retired Air Force Colonel Marcus Webb stopped dead in his tracks. That truck, that posture, that quiet dignity under ridicule, it triggered a memory from 1971, when the man behind the wheel had flown the most dangerous bombing mission in Vietnam War history. Welcome to Warrior Voices. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world you are watching this video today. And if you believe stories of unrecognized heroes deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of our warrior community. The Crossroads Shopping Center parking lot in suburban Phoenix buzzed with typical Saturday afternoon activity. Families loaded groceries, teenagers gathered around expensive cars, and elderly residents took advantage of weekend shopping deals. In the far corner, away from the newer vehicles, sat a 1987 Ford F-150 with faded blue paint and 280,000 honest miles on the odometer. Robert "Bobby" Hendricks, 78, moved with methodical precision as he loaded his carefully budgeted groceries. His Social Security and modest veteran's pension required strategic shopping, chicken thighs over breasts, generic brands, unit price calculations that maximized nutrition per dollar. The truck bore honest wear from 30 years of faithful service, its paint sun-faded but engine reliable, maintained with the same attention to detail he'd once applied to more sophisticated machines. The group of teenagers around a late-model sports car hadn't noticed him initially, too absorbed in their own loud conversation. But as Bobby reached for his last grocery bag, their attention shifted his direction. "Look at that piece of junk," said their apparent leader, pointing directly at Bobby's truck with no attempt to lower his voice. "Bet it doesn't even run half the time." "Probably held together with duct tape," added a girl with perfectly styled hair and a smartphone worth more than Bobby's monthly grocery budget. "Why would anyone drive something that embarrassing?" "Maybe he can't afford anything better," suggested another, though his tone carried mockery rather than sympathy. "Look at those clothes, probably shops at thrift stores." Bobby continued his routine, unmoved by the commentary. His thrift store clothes were clean and functional, form following function, a principle that had guided most of his adult life. The teenager's assumptions about failure and decline were nothing new. People saw what they expected to see in an elderly man with an old truck. What they couldn't see was the small weathered decal in the truck's rear window. Faded by years of Arizona sun, the distinctive insignia of the 8th Tactical Fighter Squadron was barely visible. Wings spread over crossed lightning bolts. To most observers, it would appear as meaningless automotive decoration. But to someone with knowledge of military aviation history, that insignia represented something extraordinary. Across the parking lot, retired Air Force Colonel Marcus Webb loaded his own groceries when the teenager's mockery caught his attention. At 75, Webb still carried himself with military bearing, though 15 years into retirement. His first instinct was to ignore juvenile behavior, but something about the elderly man's composed dignity under ridicule nagged at him. As Webb prepared to leave, his routine scan of the old pickup caught something that made him freeze. In the rear window, barely visible from his angle, was a military decal that triggered instant recognition. Wings over lightning bolts. The 8th Tactical Fighter Squadron. Webb studied the truck's owner more carefully. Right age, right build, military precision in his movements. Could this possibly be Bobby Hendricks, callsign Striker, the pilot who had undertaken the most dangerous solo mission in squadron history? December 15, 1971. The date burned in Webb's memory with laser precision. He'd been a young lieutenant at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base when intelligence reports indicated a major North Vietnamese supply convoy moving through heavily defended Mugia Pass. The convoy represented a critical target, military supplies that would support enemy operations for months. but reaching it required flying through the most concentrated anti-aircraft defenses in Southeast Asia. The mission was deemed too dangerous for conventional attack. The pass bristled with surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and MiG fighters. A normal strike package would face unacceptable losses. But the intelligence was too valuable to ignore. That's when Captain Robert Hendricks volunteered for a single aircraft mission. Webb remembered the briefing room where Hendricks outlined his plan. Using a single F-4 Phantom loaded with specialized ordnance, he would approach at extremely low altitude, using terrain to mask his approach from radar. The mission required split-second timing, perfect navigation, and flying skills that pushed both pilot and aircraft to absolute limits. It's suicide, Webb had thought, though he hadn't voiced it. One aircraft against an entire air defense network, with no backup and no support. If anything went wrong, navigation error, unexpected defenses, mechanical failure, Hendricks would die instantly with no possibility of rescue. But Hendricks had been insistent. Someone has to try. That convoy carries enough ammunition to kill a lot of our people. If there's a chance to stop it, we take that chance. Now Webb watched as the man he was certain was Hendricks endured teenage mockery while loading groceries. The contrast was surreal. A man who'd risked everything for his country, being ridiculed by young people whose freedom to speak had been purchased with his courage. Webb recalled the anxious hours following Hendricks' departure. The entire base waited in silence for radio contact indicating success or failure. Communications were minimal to avoid enemy interception, leaving everyone to wait and wonder. When Hendricks' voice finally crackled through the radio, "Stryker returning, mission accomplished." Relief in the operations center was palpable. Not only had he survived the impossible mission, but intelligence confirmed he destroyed the entire convoy, eliminating a major threat to American forces throughout the region. The mission earned Hendricks the Distinguished Flying Cross, recognition as one of the war's finest combat pilots. But like many classified operations, details remained unknown outside military circles. No newspaper articles, no documentaries, no public recognition for accomplishing what an entire squadron might not have achieved. Webb realized he was witnessing the same pattern affecting many Vietnam veterans. Extraordinary service followed by civilian life where that service was unknown or forgotten. Hendricks had risked his life for country and returned home to drive an old truck, shop carefully for groceries, and endure teenage mockery. The injustice galvanized Webb into action. As Hendricks climbed into his truck and started the engine, Webb walked quickly across the parking lot. The teenagers continued laughing, apparently unaware they were about to receive an education about respect and recognition. "Excuse me," Webb called out, his voice carrying command authority. The teenagers turned, expressions shifting from amusement to uncertainty as they registered his bearing and demeanor. Webb approached Hendricks' truck as the engine turned over with reliable rumble. He knocked gently on the driver's window, and Hendricks rolled it down with questioning expression. "Captain Hendricks?" Webb said, his tone making clear he was certain of identification. "Colonel Marcus Webb, retired Air Force. I was stationed at Ubon in '71. Hendricks' expression changed immediately, recognition flickering across weathered features. "Lieutenant Webb? Marcus Webb from Operations." "That's right," Webb confirmed, satisfaction surging at mutual recognition. "Colonel Webb now, retired in 2009. The teenagers moved closer, mockery replaced by curiosity about the interaction. Other shoppers began noticing the conversation, sensing something significant occurring. Webb turned to address the teenagers directly, voice carrying crisp authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "You young people have been having quite a bit of fun making jokes about this man's truck." The group's leader, so confident in his mockery moments before, now looked uncomfortable under Webb's steady gaze. It's kind of a junky old truck." "That junky old truck," Webb said, voice growing colder, "belongs to Captain Robert Hendricks, one of the finest combat pilots who ever served our country. While you've been making jokes, you've been insulting a man who risked his life to protect the freedom that allows you to speak." The teenagers' expressions shifted from discomfort to confusion, then approaching embarrassment as they began understanding their casual cruelty had deeper implications. Webb continued. Attention focused on the young people. On December 15, 1971, Captain Hendricks flew a solo mission into the most heavily defended airspace in Southeast Asia. He destroyed an entire enemy supply convoy that would have killed American soldiers. He did this alone, in a single aircraft, against impossible odds. Hendricks looked uncomfortable with attention, waving dismissively from inside the truck. Marcus, that was long ago. These kids don't need to hear about ancient history. Ancient history? Webb's voice carried disbelief. Captain, what you did saved American lives. That's not ancient history. That's heroism deserving recognition and respect. A small crowd gathered as other shoppers became aware of the conversation. An elderly woman loading groceries approached to listen. A middle-aged man with family stopped to observe. Store employees collecting carts paused their work. Webb sensed the growing audience and realized he had opportunity to provide education extending beyond the original teenagers. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, raising his voice slightly, I want you to meet Captain Robert Hendricks, a Vietnam War veteran who flew one of the most dangerous combat missions in aviation history. Hendricks tried minimizing attention. Marcus, really, this isn't necessary. I just came to buy groceries. And these young people thought it appropriate to mock you for driving an old truck, Webb replied firmly. I think it's very necessary for them to understand who they were ridiculing. He turned back to the teenagers, now distinctly uncomfortable as they realized their behavior was being witnessed and criticized by growing numbers of adults. Would you like to know why Captain Hendricks drives that truck instead of something newer and fancier? The teenagers remained silent, apparently unsure whether they were expected to answer or simply endure the coming lecture. It's because men like Captain Hendricks don't measure worth by material possessions, Webb continued. They measure it by service to others, by duty fulfilled, by courage demonstrated when it mattered most. That truck gets him where he needs to go reliably and economically. What more does he need? Webb paused, allowing words to sink in. You see an old truck and assume it represents failure or poverty. I see a vehicle owned by a man with priorities straight, a man who cares more about substance than appearance, more about service than status. An elderly man in the crowd spoke up. What kind of mission did he fly? You said it was dangerous? Webb looked to Hendricks for permission to continue. After moments' hesitation, the retired pilot nodded slightly. Captain Hendricks volunteered for a solo bombing mission against heavily defended target in North Vietnam. The mission required flying alone through the most concentrated anti-aircraft defenses in the war zone. Military analysts considered it essentially suicidal. The crowd had grown larger. Perhaps 20 people gathered around the truck. The teenagers were trapped in the center, unable to leave without pushing through adults who had stopped to listen. The target was supply convoy carrying ammunition and weapons that would have been used against American troops, Webb continued. Intelligence indicated destroying the convoy could save dozens, possibly hundreds of American lives. But reaching the target meant flying through surface-to-air missile sites, anti-aircraft artillery, and enemy fighter patrols. A middle-aged woman asked, Did he succeed? Did he make it back? Webb smiled for the first time since beginning his impromptu lecture. Not only did he make it back, but he destroyed the entire convoy. The mission was complete success. Captain Hendricks accomplished alone what a full squadron might not have achieved. Spontaneous applause broke out among gathered shoppers. The teenagers looked around nervously, clearly wishing they could disappear as attention focused on their earlier behavior. Hendricks appeared deeply uncomfortable with praise, though he acknowledged the crowd with brief wave through his truck window. The mission earned Captain Hendricks the Distinguished Flying Cross, Webb added. One of the highest decorations for aerial combat. But more importantly, it saved American lives and disrupted enemy operations for months. An older man wearing military veteran's cap approached Hendricks' truck. Sir, I want to thank you for your service. My son served in Afghanistan, and I know how much courage it takes to put yourself in harm's way for others. Other crowd members began offering thanks and expressions of respect. The teenagers found themselves surrounded by adults, making clear their earlier behavior was unacceptable. Finally, the group's apparent leader approached Hendricks' truck. "Sir," he said, voice much quieter than during earlier Mockery, "I want to apologize for what we said about your truck. We didn't know. We shouldn't have said those things anyway, but we really didn't know who you were." Hendricks rolled down his window fully and looked at the young man with patient eyes. "Son, you couldn't have known about my service. That's not the issue. The issue is that you thought it acceptable to mock someone based on appearance or possessions. That's not about military service. That's about basic human decency." The teenager nodded, looking genuinely chastened. "You're right, sir. It was wrong of us to make fun of you. I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Hendricks replied simply. "Just remember that everyone has a story. Everyone has value. Judge people by character and actions, not by what they drive or wear." Webb watched this exchange with satisfaction, feeling an important lesson was being learned. But he wasn't finished with his contribution to the education taking place. "There's something else you should understand," Webb said to assembled crowd. "Captain Hendricks represents thousands of Vietnam veterans who came home to a country that didn't appreciate their service. Many faced hostility and indifference when they returned. They've spent decades living quietly among us, their extraordinary service known only to fellow veterans." He gestured toward Hendricks' truck. "That decal in the rear window represents one of the most elite fighter squadrons in Air Force history. Most people walk past symbols like that every day without recognizing their significance. We're surrounded by heroes who don't advertise their heroism." As the crowd began dispersing, Webb approached Hendricks' window one more time. "Bobby, I'm glad I finally found you. I've been looking for squadron members for years. Would you be interested in getting together? Maybe coffee or lunch?" Hendricks smiled genuinely for the first time since the encounter began. "I'd like that, Marcus. It's been a long time since I talked to someone who understood that part of my life." They exchanged contact information before Hendricks drove away, his old truck running smoothly and reliably, leaving behind a parking lot full of people who had learned something important about respect, service, and the heroes who live quietly among us. 3 months later, Webb and Hendricks had developed regular friendship built around shared military experience and mutual respect. Their Wednesday morning coffee meetings became opportunity to share stories about service and post-military lives. Through these conversations, Webb learned about Hendricks' post-war experience. After Vietnam, he'd worked 30 years as commercial airline pilot, married, raised 2 children, and built stable, modest life, focused on family and community service. His decision to drive older truck wasn't financial necessity, but practical consideration and philosophical rejection of materialism. "I learned in Vietnam that important things in life aren't things you can buy," Hendricks explained during one coffee meeting. "They're relationships you build, service you provide, and integrity you maintain. Everything else is just decoration." The parking lot incident had broader implications beyond their personal reconnection. Webb began using his retirement time to locate other squadron members, discovering many had experienced similar patterns of post-war anonymity, working regular jobs and living quiet lives while extraordinary service remained largely unknown. This led Webb to organize reunion for surviving members of 8th Tactical Fighter Squadron. Using military databases and extensive detective work, he located 12 surviving pilots and crew members from their Vietnam War unit. The reunion brought together men who hadn't seen each other in decades. For many, it was first time since the war they'd been in room with people who truly understood their experiences and could appreciate the significance of their service. "These men need to know their service mattered," Webb told Hendricks. "They need to hear from each other that what they did was important and that it's remembered and appreciated." The reunion proved a powerful experience for all involved. Stories were shared that had never been told to civilian family members. Recognition was given for acts of courage that had been classified or forgotten. Most importantly, connections were renewed between men who had shared extraordinary experiences. During reunion dinner, Webb addressed assembled veterans. "Gentlemen, we're here because we served together during one of the most challenging periods in American military history. We flew dangerous missions, faced hostile fire, and lost friends. but we also accomplished our mission and served our country with honor. The reunion led to establishment of scholarship fund honoring squadron members killed in action. Surviving veterans pooled resources to create educational foundation, helping children and grandchildren of military families pursue higher education. It's a way of ensuring their sacrifice continues to have meaning, Hendricks explained. Every student who receives this help will know their education was made possible by airmen who gave their lives in service to their country. 1 year after parking lot incident, Webb arranged for Hendricks to speak at local high school's Veterans Day assembly. The invitation came after Webb contacted the principal and shared Hendricks' story, emphasizing educational value of having students hear directly from combat veteran. Hendricks spoke for 20 minutes about his service, focusing not on dramatic mission details but on values that had guided his military and civilian life. Duty, integrity, service to others, and importance of standing up for what's right, even when difficult. I didn't fly dangerous missions because I was fearless, Hendricks told assembled students. I was afraid every time I climbed into that cockpit. But I flew those missions because my fellow servicemen were counting on me, and because I believed in protecting something larger than myself. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Students approached afterward with questions about military service and making difference in their communities. Teachers commented it was one of most impactful Veterans Day presentations they'd witnessed. The success led to media attention for both men. Local television station produced feature story about parking lot incident and its aftermath, highlighting importance of recognizing veterans' service. The story reached national outlets and television producer developing documentary about Vietnam War veterans. The documentary featured Hendricks as one of several veterans whose post-war experiences illustrated challenges faced by those who served in unpopular conflict. The program emphasized contrast between extraordinary service and ordinary civilian lives, often without recognition. It's strange to have your life reduced to a 1-hour television program, Hendricks reflected after documentary aired. But if it helps people understand what Vietnam veterans went through and encourages better treatment of current veterans, then it was worth doing. 5 years after parking lot incident, Webb and Hendricks were invited to speak at National Conference on Veteran Affairs. Their presentation, From Mockery to Recognition, The Hidden Heroes Among Us, drew audience of policymakers and veteran service organization leaders. They used their story as starting point for broader discussion about how society recognizes military service, arguing that daily interactions between veterans and civilians often have more impact than formal ceremonies. Recognition doesn't have to be elaborate or expensive, Webb told conference audience. Sometimes it's as simple as taking time to listen to veterans' story, or thanking someone for their service, or just treating them with basic human dignity and respect. 10 years after their encounter, both men continued advocacy work while maintaining weekly coffee meetings. They had become elder statesmen in local veteran community, mentoring younger veterans and ensuring their experiences were passed to future generations. The best way to honor our service is to help others who served after us, Hendricks often said. We can't change the past, but we can work to ensure current and future veterans are treated better than we were. Their friendship, born from mutual recognition and shared experience, had evolved into partnership focused on service to others. They had transformed moment of casual cruelty into lasting commitment to education, advocacy, and support for those who answered their country's call. The old blue pickup truck still sat in Hendricks' driveway, still reliable, still bearing the faded squadron decal. But now it represented something more than transportation. It had become symbol of dignity, maintained under pressure, of worth transcending material possessions, and of heroes who live quietly among us, unrecognized until someone takes time to really see them. Sometimes heroes drive old trucks. Sometimes they shop carefully for groceries and endure mockery from people who don't understand their value. But sometimes, if we're fortunate, someone who knows their story speaks up. Someone who was there, who understands what they accomplished, who refuses to let quiet heroism go unrecognized. This story was brought to you by Warrior Voices. Bobby Hendricks' journey reminds us that extraordinary people often live ordinary lives, their heroism hidden beneath humble exteriors and modest circumstances. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet dignity deserved more recognition than they received? Tell us in the comments about the unsung heroes in your life. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.